3:06 on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese, and I appreciate you being here. The phone number remains 888-630 WMAL, 888-630-9625. I'm listening to some of this audio that just came down from. What did Dan Bongino call Joe Biden? Spaghetti-o brains or something like that? It actually does apply with President Biden. He was having a really bad day. There's no other way to say it. And so I'm listening to some of this audio, and it's like all the greatest Biden hits are there. I mean, there's moments where you can't understand what he's saying. There's moments where he doesn't know where it is that he's going, and he's telling one lie after another. And so, right before showtime, the audio starts coming down from, I guess he's in Milwaukee, trying to sell Bidenomics, which, by the way, that's going to be a pretty tough sell to the majority of the American people who have been suffering through Bidenomics. But nonetheless, we do have some audio from the president, and part of course, the charm, if you will, of Joe Biden is that he says things that nobody really understands what it is that he's trying to say.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again, what
was that? Did you get that? Because I didn't.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again,
I got bipartisan. I got that. But then it was just like he rushes through like even he doesn't remember what he's trying to say. So he's just going to mumble a whole bunch of vowels.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again,
if I had like some concert tickets to give away, I would give them away to the first person who could tell me what the heck Joe Biden is saying.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again,
all right, your guess is as good as mine. If you can find me on Twitter at Dan Mandis Show, tell me what exactly it is that Joe Biden says. And there's other stuff. And, for the president, there's a number of things that's going on, right? So there are the lies that he perpetually tells. As a matter of fact, you also heard Dan, and it was interesting because as he's wrapping up his show, he is recounting what it is that the president said as he is on the road. And believe it or not, I don't know how many times. It is actually pretty stunning where the president tells the same debunked stories over and over again, including the one regarding Amtrak, where, he's talking to the conductor. He was talking about how he had millions of miles that he traveled on Amtrak and the Air Force planes.
The Secret Service are the best in the world. They don't like me traveling the train because there are too many opportunities for people to do bad things on trains. And
right.
So I'm getting on a train to go home and see my mom, who was sick.
Now, you realize that he has told this story many times.
Get him in trouble.
And he just said that he was talking about this conductor, and he doesn't want to say his name because he's afraid that he's going to get him in trouble. That Amtrak conductor, he died back like 9 years ago. It's the same story. It's the same story that he has told. And every time he tells the story, it has been debunked. Yet he continues to tell the story. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about the president. I believe that he is, a pathological liar. But you could also say that he literally is losing his ability to form a cohesive thought. And I don't say this lightly. Please understand that I had a stepmother who died of Alzheimer's, and it was the most painful thing that I've ever gone through. And watching as her brain, unfortunately it faded to black. It was one of the hardest things that I've ever been through. And I'm seeing that with Joe Biden. And the stunning thing is that he does this over and over again, and his handlers don't pull him aside and say, Mr. President, you've told that story like 22,000 times. And every time you do, people fact check you on that. So maybe you might want to just, stop telling the story about the conductor. That might be a good idea. Because every time you do, well, people call you out. And so I don't know if his handlers are telling him not to say that, and he's just forgetting, and he gets in front of the microphone and he just starts telling these stories over and over again. But the amazing thing is his cabinet. How many times have we talked about the 25th Amendment? His cabinet refuses to even acknowledge that he keeps doing these things, much to the dismay of Americans. I mean, how many times has Joe Biden regaled us with the stories of, how he was part of the civil rights movement, how he was out there during the marches and during the sit-ins, and then, the Biden team had to acknowledge, I think even he had to acknowledge that, no, actually, that never actually happened. But his first run at the presidency ended in plagiarism. So none of this is real surprising. And to be candid, I don't know what's worse. Is it worse that the president is constantly lying to Americans? Or is it worse that maybe he's suffering from, some big time cognitive function, and, you can't necessarily blame Biden for that because, it's happening to him. My stepmom, when she was starting to lose her mental faculties, she didn't know what was happening. But, her family did. And don't you know that Joe Biden, his family clearly knows that he is having cognitive decline. His cabinet clearly knows that he's having cognitive decline. The media clearly knows that he is having cognitive decline. Yet nobody wants to do anything. Nobody wants to even acknowledge what's going on. Even though for America and Americans, we see exactly what's going on with the president.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again, which...
All right, well, whatever. All I'm saying, and by the way, there's a lot to criticize when it comes to Joe Biden. Everybody knows this. Here on WMAL, we speak about these things all the time. By the way, I'm Dan. I'm just filling in. Appreciate you being here. I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee. And the phone number, 888-630-WMAL, 888-630-9625. The other part, of course, is the fact with the Biden speech. Oh, he said this one, too. Again, it's all about lies and obfuscations. This is a good one. And again, I discovered this audio right before I cracked the microphone here at the mighty WMAL.
And unlike the last president, in my first 2 years in office, even with all we've done, I'm the first one to cut the federal debt by $1.7 trillion.
Wow.
$1.7 trillion cut.
Yeah, although that as well has been fact-checked, and clearly the president has not done that. And by the way, when he keeps talking about that, and I'll have the precise numbers for you, but remember that he keeps throwing, former President Donald Trump under the bus, talking about, the previous president. The previous president, Joe, you may not remember this, but the previous president, he was dealing with COVID. Remember that whole thing? And so then you came on board, I would say to Joe Biden, you come on board. And then, of course, what do? All of the stimulus packages that you put forward, all of the free money that you gave the American people, what did that ultimately end up doing? Yeah, it caused skyrocketing inflation. That has now caused a housing crisis, helped to cause a housing crisis, because interest rates have skyrocketed because of your inflation. And so that causes rents to go up. That causes the cost of homes to go up. And now we have a massive homeless crisis and housing crisis in this country, thanks to you. And so the more that Joe Biden speaks, and the best part, I always find this funny. He wraps up, of course, he wraps up his speech.
May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Very good. He's looking to his left. He's looking to his right. He's not entirely certain where to go. So he kind of, sort of waves to the crowd and then kind of does that Joe Biden rapid, fast walk kind of a thing that he does off to the side of the stage. You know what they need? I don't know if they can do this. Can they put like a big sort of finger pointer on the teleprompter so that when, the theme, all that stuff starts playing, the big finger can, point Joe one way or the other so that he knows which way to go to get off the stage. I don't know, just a thought. By the way, very quickly, because I do have a lot to speak about, including certainly the indictments that are going on with former President Donald Trump in Georgia. But just to talk about real quickly, this was from the Wall Street Journal, just since I wandered into this topic related to Joe Biden. The headline from the Wall Street Journal, homelessness is rising big time across America. And I call it, of course, yes, perhaps another sign of Bidenomics. It is up 11% across the board since last year. Now, how is it that you can tie this to Joe Biden? Well, it's easy. Rising housing costs, of course, again, a big reason why housing is going up is interest rates. That's thanks to the inflation, and that inflation is thanks to Biden's spending and stimulus packages. Also, part of what's going on is the eviction moratorium is over, meaning you have to pay rent again or you're out. That and, of course, all the pandemic-era relief is also over. So all of that extra government gimmies is now gone. That is leading to the homelessness. People now are going to have to get their butts back to work, perhaps. Let's not forget, of course, by the way, as we talk about the rise in homelessness, let's also not forget about the businesses that were destroyed as part of the COVID lockdowns, the government's overreaction to the COVID lockdowns. And that's on Donald Trump. That's on Joe Biden. That's on Dr. Anthony Fauci. That's on governors as well. I mean, we all know that there's a lot of blame to go around when we talk about the overreaction of COVID and all those businesses that were shut down. Careers destroyed, jobs lost. And by the way, speaking of lost jobs, I can't hang this one on the president. Let's not forget about all those people that lost jobs because of the vaccination mandates. That is Joe Biden. He's the one that called for that. Let's also not forget about the military discharging all of those military heroes that were unvaccinated. You think all that caused homelessness? Well, absolutely right. And by the way, the Wall Street Journal also in this article, they talk about drug use, opioids and fentanyl. Well, guess where that's coming across, folks? That's coming across Joe Biden's open border. So if you want to throw in, another sign of Bidenomics, okay, let's talk about the drug use that's coming from China into Mexico and across our wide open southern border. And the fact that this president, Joe Biden, refuses to even acknowledge that the problem is coming from China. And at the very least, have some sort of a confrontation or conversation at the very least with Chinese President Xi Jinping. So while the president is out there, bragging on his economic programs, people are still suffering with higher gas prices. Inflation is continuing to have its impact as well. So that is just part of what the president is talking about today in Milwaukee as, again, homelessness is continuing to rise big time across America. Reasonably certain that won't be part of the president's presentation. 888-630-9625, News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince. I still haven't figured this out.
But then, when I signed the bipartisan infrastructure again,
that's President Biden. See, this is why they can't take him anywhere, because these are the kinds of things that happen. The president was speaking in Milwaukee, and he's trying to tout the Bidenomics and the whole thing, and it did not go well, and I'm just trying to figure out what in the world the president was saying. And here's the funny thing, is that either he completely butchers and just runs a whole bunch of vowels together and you just can't understand what the heck he's saying. But when you can understand what he's saying, they're lies. Max is in Mechanicsville on WMAL, line 1. Hey, Max.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. What he's saying is, when I passed that bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the reason I know that, I try to listen to both of these guys, Biden and Trump. They both have this way of talking, and that's not hyperbole. This is not hyperbole, and
right.
It's no joke. They say that, and then they say China, or they say huge. This is terrific. They have these politicians are really. I hate to say on both. I voted for Biden. He's an empty suit. He really doesn't have. He's really not pulling the strings. He's not calling the shots.
Well, hey, Max. Max, hold on. Can I ask you a question? So, do you have? And this is not like a gotcha question at all. Do you have Biden regret syndrome? Do you regret voting for President Biden, considering some of the stuff that's happened? It's been 2 years since the horrific pullout of Afghanistan. Do you have any regrets? And by the way, if you say no, that's fine. I'm curious.
I mean, I don't have, as far as politics go, I don't have regrets. It's a calculated decision. I voted for Biden. The problem is Biden doesn't, what I didn't realize is that Biden himself, his family, and his ties to the Democratic Party are all different things. And I didn't realize that. But I don't think it's regret, because I haven't really been able to vote for anybody that doesn't seem to get into this quagmire in politics. There aren't a lot. I mean, Trump's a bit of a different animal. I just don't like that guy. But as far as a political animal, he's a little different. But when you're a party member, see, I'm not part of a party. I don't believe in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I mean, where am I supposed to go? Vote for Jill Stein? I mean, that was a mess.
All right, Max, thank you very much. We're losing you, and it's time for the break anyway. But appreciate your call, and I appreciate your honesty as well. Dan here in for Vince on WMAL. It's News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Thank you very much for joining us. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. And a little something happened last night, of course, out of Georgia. Not sure if you heard. I'm kidding. I know that you've heard what is going on with former President Donald Trump, although it does feel like deja vu all over again, doesn't it? I mean, every time you turn around, the man's being indicted again. Got into an argument with the guy because, we talk show hosts. We always argue with people, it would appear. But the thing is, people are always picking fights with us, and that's what happens. And so this guy on the left, he says, Donald Trump, he's always getting indicted. This is your guy. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, this has never happened before. And I turned right back at him, and I said, when have we ever seen a big-time political candidate, presidential candidate for a major political party, the Republican Party, get brought up on all these various indictments, all these different cases and so forth? Never seen that before. Clearly, the Democrats are gunning for this guy. And of course, then, he came back at me with, well, how do you know he's, really done something wrong? How do you know that he's not out there breaking all these kind of laws? And I said, well, how do you know that he is? And so then that goes back to, well, who is your political analyst? And who do you like to listen to? And who do you believe? Now, me, I like to listen to Jonathan Turley. I like to listen to Andrew McCarthy. I like to listen to Allan Dershowitz. And I like to listen to Ted Cruz.
I'm pissed. I'm pissed at these over and over and over again. If there are indictments tonight, it'll be the fourth indictment of Donald Trump. This is disgraceful. Our country is over 200 years old. We have never once indicted a former president or a candidate and a leading candidate for president. And this is Joe Biden and this is the Democrats weaponizing the justice system because they're afraid of the voters. This is disgraceful. It is wrong, and it is an abuse of power by angry Democrats who have decided the rule of law doesn't matter to them anymore.
Yeah, that is, of course, again, Ted Cruz. And I think, he's saying it for all of us if you are a Republican or a conservative. And so as I'm going back and forth with this Trump hater guy on the left, and I'm saying, well, how do you know that Donald Trump has actually done anything wrong? How do you know that this isn't really a witch hunt? And again, he came back with, well, how do you know the former president hasn't done things that are wrong and illegal and so forth? And I reminded him that in this country, we are innocent until proven guilty, and on it goes. But as you know, now we do have the situation where the former president has been charged with many different crimes, making false statements and writings for a series of claims he made to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and other state election officials on January 2nd, 2021, including that up to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls in the 2020 election, that more than 4,500 people voted who weren't on regulation lists, and that a Fulton County election worker, Ruby Freeman, was a professional vote scammer. Here's the thing. Do we or do we not have accountability in this country? Do we or do we not have the right to look at some of these elections and say, this doesn't look quite right? And so you're telling me now that every time a political candidate loses an election and wants some clarification on some things, we're going to start politicizing it and start talking about racketeering and the RICO Act? And I know that you've been hearing all day about, what exactly is racketeering. Basically, generally speaking, this allows prosecutors to charge multiple people who commit separate crimes while working towards a common goal. And so you've got Donald Trump, and you've got Mark Meadows, and you've got Rudy Giuliani, and you've got some other folks. You got Sidney Powell. And, as the left will tell you, as the Democrats will tell you, and Fani Willis will tell you, what they're talking about is trying to, working with this common goal in mind, working together, breaking all of these laws to overturn the election in Georgia. And that's how they come up with the racketeering charges. Now, there's a lot to be said about what's going on here, and I agree with Ted Cruz, and it does feel like every time you turn around, there is yet another set of indictments. And so there's a lot of legal experts out there that are saying that they don't believe that this is going to stand up in a court of law on appeal, including none other than Allan Dershowitz.
The whole strategy of all these four cases is to get a conviction before the election, even if they're going to lose on appeal. I used to teach my students, many of them future prosecutors, if you bring a RICO case, that increases your chances of winning a trial and losing on appeal. The same thing is true with conspiracy and other cases involving mental states. And so all four of these cases are designed to get quick convictions in jurisdictions that are heavily loaded against Donald Trump.
Yeah, so in other words, let's do what we can to disrupt the 2024 presidential campaign. I mean, Allan Dershowitz just said it. They don't necessarily care whether or not it's going to win on appeal. They just want, again, as he said, they want a quick conviction during the presidential campaign to do whatever they can to try and torpedo whatever chances Donald Trump has in winning not only the primary, but then the general election. And so you just heard what he said. Get a quick conviction, even if it loses on appeal, because ultimately what they want to see is Donald Trump lose the election. And even if it does lose on appeal, well, it doesn't matter, because at that point, the damage is done. Right? I mean, it seems to me like that's what Allan Dershowitz is saying. And this is exactly, he says, exactly what our founding fathers feared.
If you're going after the man running for president against your person, you have to have the strongest case. Otherwise, it becomes a banana republic. Anybody can prosecute anybody. And we're opening the door to prosecution of Democrats by Republicans, Republicans by Democrats. It's what Alexander Hamilton wrote in The Federalist is the most dangerous threat. to democracy, and we're seeing it unfold in front of our eyes.
Yeah, and I don't have to tell you folks that Hamilton wrote often about his fears of what he calls and what many other people call political intolerance and a loss of free speech. Now, the intolerance comes in when you have people like Donald Trump and Mark Meadows and Sidney Powell and all of these other folks, Rudy Giuliani, and they're calling into question the election. And they're asking for, simply put, clarification. And so it does seem to me that with all of these indictments that keep coming down over and over again, that it reeks of political intolerance. And that will ultimately mean the loss of free speech. And where does it end? Because remember, part of the history of the last several years is we had the question about Hunter Biden's laptop, and you had, those 51 intelligence officials, both sides of the aisle, who said that the laptop from hell was Russian disinformation. Well, that turned out to be false. But if it were up to the left, they would want to throw Donald Trump and you and I in jail for even calling that into question. And saying, no, that is actually, looks like it's a real and credible laptop to me. But before we find out the truth, the election was over. And so one of the things that I would remind you, and by the way, coming up at 4:06, I'm going to speak with Hans von Spakovsky, of course, from the Heritage Foundation, and he is an expert on all things elections. And one of the things that I would remind you is that over and over again during the presidency of Donald Trump, and by the way, before it sounds like, because I know that a lot of you are, perhaps sitting here and you don't know me that well, if at all, but I am a free agent when it comes to the Republican Party. I am a conservative. I am not tied to any one candidate. I'm not tied to Donald Trump. I'm not tied to, Tim Scott or Ron DeSantis or Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm a free agent. And I have been so incredibly frustrated with Donald Trump for many different reasons. So I'm not just sitting here, doing what I can to help Donald Trump and help spread the word of the greatness of Donald Trump. This is so far beyond Donald Trump. This isn't about Donald Trump. This is about what Hamilton wrote about, political intolerance, because it might be Donald Trump today, but it might be whoever on the Republican Party in 2 years, in another 2 years, in another 2 years. In other words, once the Democrats find the blood in the water, once they figure out how to do this, you really think that they're going to stop? No. You remember when we were talking about Donald Trump earlier, and it was, I forget which conspiracy it was. I forget which case it was. But they were talking about Donald Trump, and they were talking about this theory, this philosophy, if you will, where you show me the man, I'll find you the crime. Well, that's beginning to feel like what it really is, which is they've got Donald Trump. He spent some time in office. He asked some questions. The swamp hated him. The intelligence agencies hated him. Democrats obviously hated him. The media hated him as well. And so what better opportunity than for all of those entities to get together and practice some of that political intolerance, which ultimately will impact the 2024 election and could also result in your loss of free speech, as we've seen over the last several years as it relates to, COVID, social media posts, what you post on social media about any number of things, including the election. And so this case in Georgia is literally both of those. It is political intolerance. It is a loss of free speech. And it seems to be okay for those people on the left. It seems to be a reason to celebrate among the pariahs in the mainstream media. political intolerance where you can't question anything. If you do, you risk indictments. You risk jail time. You risk being deprived of your right to petition the government. I mean, Jonathan Turley was on Fox News right as all of this was coming down, and he brought up that now infamous phone call where the former president was talking about trying to find 11,000 plus votes. Remember this.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Yeah. All right. So that's, and by the way, I've listened to that whole call, and I've listened to it many times, as a matter of fact. And for those of you who would say, well, he was trying to bully the Georgia election officials, actually, if you listen to the call, they were standing up to Donald Trump. They were. They were standing up to Donald Trump, and they were saying, Mr. President, you are wrong. Those 300,000 votes that supposedly dropped out of nowhere, that never happened. The person you're saying is a vote scammer or whatever it was, that's certainly not true. So it was a discussion amongst adults. And Jonathan Turley was on Fox News talking about that call.
One of the most concerning aspects about this particular investigation, and there's a number of them, is that it began after the disclosure of the call of Donald Trump to Georgia election officials. That call has been widely misrepresented, in my view.
Yeah, it has been misrepresented, because I'm listening to the call, and I've listened to it, and you have people that are saying, well, he was trying to overthrow. He wasn't trying to overthrow anything. He was trying to clarify and trying to get to the people in Georgia to try to see his side of the story. That's all he was doing. Here's more from that now infamous call where the president was talking about those 300,000 votes.
You even see it by rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25,000, 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people, and it never made sense. But we have a number of things. We have at least two or three, anywhere from 250 to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls. Much of that had to do with Fulton County.
Yeah, so the president, he's pleading his case. And when has that been illegal? I mean, remember Bush versus Gore? You always see disagreements, or oftentimes you see disagreements. That doesn't mean that you throw down indictments and put people in jail. It just doesn't. One more audio bite from Jonathan Turley on that call.
In the call, President Trump at the time said you only need to find around 11,000 votes. And that has been taken as an invitation for fraud. There is, of course, a more obvious explanation, and that is the Georgia officials were saying that further state recounts might not be necessary. And it would be natural for Trump to say, look, you only need to find 11,000 to turn the outcome of this election. So I don't need that many votes. Thus, a state recount is justified.
Yeah, I mean, that's all that the president was trying to do. And that doesn't mean that he was, because the way that they make it sound with Fonnie Willis, you know, the way that they make this sound with the racketeering and the RICO charges and all this, they make it sound like, you know, you've got Donald Trump on, holding one ankle. You've got Rudy Giuliani holding the other ankle, and they're holding the Georgia election officials over the side of a building, and they're shaking him and they're threatening him. They're going to drop him. They're going to drop him 50 floors in just, if he doesn't change the results of the election. Well, that's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. And so this could, maybe, perhaps, I don't know, but this could ultimately end up backfiring on the Democrats, although I don't know, because there's a lot of people that are out there that are saying that this is something that actually may stick as it relates to the former president. We'll have to wait and see what Hans von Spakovsky thinks. He is going to join us at 4:05 right here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL. 3:57 on WMAL. Coming up next, Hans von Spakovsky. All the latest on Donald Trump and the indictments out of Georgia. Straight ahead on WMAL.